please send your lineups in the chat. So include who's giving reply. On side proposition we have LGS JT. On side opposition we have SICAS DHA. Both of you send the lineups in the chat. My name is Laiba. I'll be the chair for this match. Let me just introduce my panelists as well. We can just go one by one. So Abdurrahman, you can start.
Hi, I'm Abdurrahman Ghazanfar.
Okay, Afra.
Hello guys, I'm Afra.
Dua.
Hello, I'm Dua.
Jahan.
Hello everyone, I'm Shahan. Best of luck for the debate.
All right, just a few notes before you start your speeches. Please mention your preferred method for POIs in the chat. If you get disconnected, just know, okay, we'll wait for 5 minutes. If the person isn't back, then we will ask another member from the same team to iron person. Just give me 1 second where we can start. The motion for this round is 1 second. Yeah, the motion for this round is this House supports protectionism in developing countries. Without any further ado, let's invite the Prime Minister to take the floor. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, wait. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you're visible and audible. मैं बस check करी हूँ हमारे पास. Okay, yes, we have the lineup. ठीक है, go ahead.
Okay. I'm just gonna get it.
For people joining this room as spectators, you need to write your full name. You can't just call yourself spectator. You need to write आपका नाम क्या, वरना मैं आपको remove कर दूंगी from the Zoom. Okay, JT, we're ready for you. Please go ahead. जल्दी कर लो थोड़ा सा.
Sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In the 1960s panel, China followed a policy of protectionism. In 1940s, Japan followed a policy of protectionism. We think the reason why both of these countries have booming economies right now is because they prioritize themselves. Insofar as these developing countries prioritize themselves, we think then they can become booming economies as well. So proud to propose. We have three argumentations for you at side proposition. First, a moral, secondly, a practical, and third, Ahmed will tell you about politics. First, on framing, what is protectionism and why is it important? We think protectionism looks like you shielding your country's domestic industries from foreign competition, like the info site says. We think this can manifest itself through 5 ways. One, we think this can look like you not letting MNCs enter your country. Secondly, we think this can look like you applying tariffs and additional taxes on imports coming to your countries from foreign countries. Thirdly, we think this can also look like you subsidizing and helping local businesses and industries via investment, etc. Fourthly, we think this can also look like you curtailing excessive spending on unnecessary things or unnecessary goods or things. But fifthly, we think this can also look like you altering the choice of loans to perhaps actors like the Asian Development Bank or bilateral actors rather than institutions that push for austerity. First argument, before I get into this, I'll take a PY if there's any. 2, 3. No PY. First, a moral argument. I'll take you later. First, a moral argument. A couple of premises I want to attack here. One, developing countries have a right to have a policy of protectionism. This is because of the context of historical plundering, colonialism, theft, and contemporary neocolonialism. This looks like colonial states like Great Britain that have looted a country of their resources, their pride, and their prestige. This looks like Great Britain that stole important resources from the subcontinent and sending it to Great Britain. We think at that point in time, these colonial states are direct beneficiaries of a country's of the resources of post-colonial states. This looks like how the Industrial Revolution was literally a consequence of plundering by the British, how literally the resources that they stole from India, how they went back to, I don't know, Great Britain, and this started the Industrial Revolution. We think this can also look like how $4.71 trillion were literally stolen from India. But secondly, we think historical plundering is responsible for the need of protectionism. We think developing countries are post-colonial states. This is important for you to understand because these are countries whose economy is literally in shambles. They don't have enough resources, but we think even if they do have resources, they are depleting, and the state literally can't focus on them, right? They have too much on their plate. This means that these developing countries are in a survival mode and they need in a survival mode and actively need corrective action. Secondly, we think systemic incapacitation by global north has also caused these countries' economies to be in shambles. We think this looks like Winston Churchill literally ordering a genocide in Bangladesh. We think this also looks like how Britain aren't paying back their reparations or have a reparatory duty, but still aren't doing that right now. But thirdly, we think this can also look like Western imperialism. Fourthly, we think this can also look like neocolonialism, right? This looks like how companies still right now plunder, right? And how you've been historically crippled. And this can also look like foreign aid dependency, how these countries still have, how these countries have an incentive to hurt post-colonial states. Secondly, we think protectionism is justified then because it is an act of proactive and reactionary self-defense. We think corrective action is required because you have to take back your authority that you once had, but also you have to prevent further exploitation that happened. This is important through 2 ways. One, we think this is important, prevent further exploitation through 2 ways. But this is important because contemporary neocolonialism has been enacted through free market capitalism, right? This is through 2 ways. One, we think the free market ideology historically has been a part of Western imperialism, right? We think countries have always used narratives like, oh, you should open your economy to states like the United States of America, to big states so they can help you. And we think this is problematic insofar as this is a way for these countries to assert dominance, to make sure that they prey on the vulnerability of post-colonial states because they know this and they have an incentive to do that because they want power and they are greedy. Secondly, we think this is important insofar as the Bretton Woods institutions still exist. We think this looks like the IMF. We think this also looks like the United States of America and other alliances that they have that are actively preying and have a malicious intent to make sure that these post-colonial states are harmed. But my second argument then, before I go into it, I'll take a PY if there's any.
Your entire case is based on the assumption that these developing countries have the capital to build their own industries. They first need the capital from foreign investment and then build up their sustainable industries.
Yeah, this is what my second argument is about. I'll tell you how these countries still have the capital to do it, but they aren't doing it right now because these big economies don't want them to do it. Second argument then, a practical. I have a couple of premises I want to tackle here. First, how industrialization is better on our side. And this is important for you to understand because insofar as you follow a policy of protectionism, you then go on and build your economy internally. This is important because you can then go on and improve the quality and quantity of your products, right? This looks like how you are literally capable and how your products are literally qualified to go out for imports, etc. But also, this is important because you can then go on and open your international markets. So open up yourselves to international markets. So you can go and then compete with international actors, right? We think this is important insofar as China has done this, where in 1960s they literally closed off their economies and opened up later when they followed a policy of protectionism and actually grew their economy internally and actually had the resource to do it. We think this also looks like India, right, which literally closed off their economy, but now built their economy through, I don't know, IT, etc., etc. But secondly, you cannot compete with international markets right now. This is because they've already established international players in the market. This is important because these international players have access to resources, right? That is to say that they are able to produce more with lower cost. This looks like Assam and Bengal and Balochistan. Thirdly, we think the exploitation of local resources is likely to occur if you follow a policy of protectionism. That is to say that you now cannot go to international markets for things like oil, right, etc. We think this is important insofar as you have to shift and your entire focus to you're developing your own resources. This looks like how you do now need to go to Balochistan to extract oil, etc. This is important because you can then go on and explore the untapped resources of Balochistan. Things like mining, which Balochistan has already been ignored of and neglected. Secondly, we think this can also lead to you increasing jobs and employment, etc. We think this is important in the context of CPEC, where a lot of majority of workers working there in Balochistan are usually Chinese workers, and Balochistani workers aren't given any importance. Insofar as now you build dams, but now Chinese workers aren't going to be building it. It's actually going to be Pakistani economy. This is also how you build undeveloped, unskilled labor within your country. Thirdly, we think this is important insofar as you diversify your economy now, right? Now you cannot put all your eggs in one basket, right? That is to say that you can't only depend on agriculture, oil, right? And now you have an incentive to diversify. That is to say that international trade, whenever it fluctuates, it won't affect you as badly anymore. But fourthly, it is important insofar as you don't have trade deficits right now, right? This is important in the case of developing countries, which already have a vast or a major difference in terms of what they import and what they export, right? This is important because now you don't have debts or a lot of debts collecting because of trade deficits. What is the impact of this? The impact of this is that you now have focus on local researchers, right, which are important, integral part of your economy. Secondly, you now have domestic investment, right? Overall, your industry is going to be matured insofar as that it can compete with other nations. Insofar as we prove to you that there's a moral justification of following a policy of protectionism, but also a pragmatic obligation us.
All right, thank you for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the first opposition speaker to take the floor.
I'll be taking POIs in the chat. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel. After like all this colonialism had happened, after we had gone through a World War II, right? That is when the globe came to this like collective conscious realization that maybe we need economies that are so interdependent that we are not able to exploit each other, to have like such like deep links with each other that exploiting one country means economic disaster for the rest of the world, right? This acts as an active deterrent to letting countries get away with their exploitation. But we also like simply don't care about their moral, because we think that the like greater moral high ground that we have is that these like developing countries simply have a responsibility to their own people right now, regardless of what had happened in the past, regardless of whether reparations in like a moral sense are given or not. We think the primary stakeholder within this debate are the people existing today, the people who are suffering the consequences of like the lack of economic development within developing countries. And I'll tell you why we practically deal with all of those impacts through my positive case, right? But like let's deal with some of their ideas anyway. they first of all talk about how countries are just, like they plundered you and they took away your wealth. So now the solution is to isolate yourself and not use like their economic resources when they're offering them to you. I think the fact that like countries like Taiwan, etc., have become so geopolitically strong and have become so strategically important to like powerful countries like the US is because of their natural resources, because of the fact that they have like semiconductors to offer to the world. We think when each country has a different specialization or when they have something different to offer, that means there's an active incentive in the world for you to engage in this trade and to like benefit each other, because everybody's reliant on each other's economies, right? So we don't necessarily think that they're like moral necessarily stands, but then like simply on truth value as well, the US was following a protectionist like system when the rest of the world was also operating like that. We don't think like these Western nations came about and imposed this on everybody. It was when the globe went through this like collective conscious shift that they all shifted to a free market system because they realized the need for globalization, right? So like they're more like just simply does not stand. And notice how they substitute any practical analysis with examples. They tell you about India, they tell you about China, and thank God Hiba spent all of prep refuting the India example, right? But like these examples simply don't stand if we tell you that first of all, this debate is not about like objecting protectionism at like on its own, but specifically about whether it can be implemented within developing nations, right? And then we also think it's like about a trade-off between our two, like the two sides' best case. Even in their best case where they have self-sufficiency, we need to prove to you why some sort of dependence or global interdependence is good, right? And we will do that throughout the bench. But then like they simply have no mechanism to explain why these industries suddenly get better, why any change happens, why is like somehow you get better like quality of life for people or anything. So I'll deal with all of those things in my own positive case. Two arguments for you today. Firstly, why the standard of living generally is compromised through protectionist policies for the common man living in a developing nation. Secondly, why you just create more global isolation and exploitation on your side for the developing countries. The first argument, then, we think what their world looks like is one where you restrict competition and also restrict consumer choice. How does this happen? Because when you follow these protectionist policies of taking out like foreign competitors, when you like actively start disincentivizing MNCs, that means that it's only like local products and local producers who are within that market, right, who are competing. This means that they have reduced incentives to be able to match their own quality to the global standard. Because understand what these like in developing countries, what do these like industries look like? They usually are victim to elite capture. That means they're concentrated in the hands of like a few wealthy families, right, who are so secure from like any sort of like consequences or like even like any sort of political power that they're able to get away with like just being complacent. With this is going to like exacerbate on your side, because right now this competition that exists with like foreign like competitors is important because it actively pushes local industries to allocate more resources towards their own production, so they don't end up cutting corners, so they don't just like participate in cheap production and then sell products for higher prices. But we also think in their world they have less pressure to innovate because they're simply like again not having to like match with like a lot of other countries who have already like innovated a lot and have come up with like a lot of good products. Which also means that on your side these local industries are simply going to become more inefficient, because if you even allocate all of your local resources to these industries, the fact that they're not able to utilize it better means in the long term you face greater economic harm, because there's like just a lack of productivity within the economic sector. What is the impact of this? Firstly, we think you have fewer choices for consumers because they simply have less quality goods to look at. This means that their choice is being restricted even when it comes to essentials. We don't think this whole idea about exploitation of natural resources then stands, because you can't have that if those natural resources don't exist. If a developing country simply does not have any sort of natural like oil or gas, etc., that means they're still going to be importing from Russia or from like the US or wherever, right? Which means that now that they have these like tariffs on imports, these prices are also going to rise. So for the average person, not only is their consumer choice being restricted, but they're also having to spend a lot more on products that are either imported, or they're paying more for products that are not even good quality, because now local competitors can sell it without having to like compete or justify why they're selling it at a certain price when they're the only ones who are able to monopolize this market. We think the harm that this has is that these local industries become so accustomed to government support and subsidies, etc., that when you remove protectionist policies, you're not able to meet their end point of having them compete in the global sphere, because they're so dependent on government support. They're so dependent on having all of this space that they become complacent and they can never meet that standard, because their own endpoint literally relies on you eventually removing these protectionist policies to be able to trade with the world or to be able to have some sort of boom, they don't meet that endpoint on their side. But then we also think this hurts employment opportunities on their side, because when you discourage foreign investment, that means people simply start losing jobs or they have limited opportunities, because you start pulling out MNCs. These MNCs literally come into your country and like provide employment opportunities to the local people, because there's like a surplus of labor within the developing countries but not enough jobs for them. So we think like we have better employment on our side as well. Before I move on to my second argument, is there any point?
If MNCs entrench themselves in the developing world and gain lobbying power in terms of governments, how, as a government, can you then also implement economic policy effectively?
Because there's a lot of economic benefit you get from them, because if they take any of their produce like to their own countries, they have to pay certain tariffs, etc. to you. So the government is still like getting economically empowered, but they're still competing with other MNCs and other like locals within that, right? We generally think that competition is better. The second argument then, how this leads to global isolation. Understand how on your side these countries just become more vulnerable to external actors, because to have a stable economy you need to stabilize your currency. But at the point when your foreign reserves simply are like weak because you're not able to trade with anybody, because you're you have such high tariffs, or because other people are now unwilling to trade with you because you have like less foreign currency or like less foreign reserves, this means that people like you actively lose your leverage within the global sphere. This also means like actors like the IMF or other like loan lending bodies can exploit you, because the IMF literally has a problem with the government constantly going into debt, right? So now when you're putting high subsidies for your people, this means that they have a further disincentive to like not give you any loans. And these loans are important for developing countries. They can't come up here and argue that suddenly you're not going to need loans, because that's not what protectionism is about. You're still going to have to meet certain deficits for your industries, etc., through external funding, right? So these loans are important to you, but protectionism policies actively villainize you within the global sphere, right? So because we think we prevent the government from going through more like economic disadvantages, we simply are able to provide you logical explanations of why their world fails. They don't meet their own endpoints after reduction, like protectionist policies are removed. Give this to DHA.
All right, I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the second proposition speaker to take the floor. Just give me a minute. Guys, just give me a few seconds. I need a little bit more paper, so I'm trying to एक ही बार में सारे. Wait. All right, sorry about that. You can go ahead. Second proposition, are you ready?
Yeah. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible and visible.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. You know, Taiwanese semiconductor industries are a really brilliant example for side government in this debate because Taiwanese semiconductor industries only were able to develop when Taiwan literally had a protectionist policy for decades. It was at that point when you had something like finished goods that you could export to the world and you opened up your economy and did international trade. The fundamental issue with side opposition within this debate is that they think that you trading raw resources to the world, the fact that you literally export these at cheap prices without developing internally at all is going to somehow give you revenue, somehow give you profits. If they're talking about how the IMF will exploit you for being weak, I think being in massive trade deficits because you never ever developed, because you never developed industries, etc., because you don't have value added goods, that's the kind of stuff that is going to lead to the IMF exploiting you, even if that happens on their side of the house. But a few strategic clarifications before I get into the issues of this debate. Number one, it is not that we're never going to globalize. Again, we're saying that this is a 30 to 40 year process that you are going to undertake. This is a policy that was done by India, that was also done by the People's Republic of China, and it was done very, very successfully by these states. You literally have examples of how this was done and how these are literally global superpowers in terms of how their economies are prosperous, right? I think at that point in time, their arguments like, oh, globalization is really important because it stops conflict, etc., do not exist and cannot be applicable in this debate because you will eventually globalize. We think this is something that is necessary at this point in time because you are still a developing nation. But the second thing I just want to point out is that they say there's a lack of capacity. But I'm going to talk about this further in my practical issue. Number one, there is capacity, but number two, what you need to recognize in this debate is that the biggest reason why there is a lack of capacity is the fact that you haven't enacted protectionism at this point in time, right? But also, the third thing that is very, very important in terms of strategy, they have to prove benefit from MNCs, not only to local individuals in terms of products that they get, but also to the government in terms of them saying that or asserting an endpoint that eventually you will have enough money to have your own industries, etc. That's something that is necessary within this debate, which they have not done yet. So then, let's talk about the issues of this debate. The first question I'm going to answer from side opposition to this debate is the question on capacity, right? Because again, why and how does capacity exist for these developing countries? Number one, we told you how there's resource availability in terms of natural resources. Why is this important? This literally looks like how billions of dollars currently are buried in Assam and Bengal and territories like Balochistan. The reason why you have never exploited these mineral resources is not because you don't have the capacity. If you cut your losses for a little while and built a factory or built a mineral resource plant, etc., you could. But the reason why you have not is because of the fact that you did not have protectionism, or you rely right now or have a dependency on foreign resources. The fact that you are greedy as a developing country because the fact that you just want to look at short-termistic incentives, right? That looks like maybe you thinking that there is a 4-year term that I have as a government within this developing country. There's a lot of political instability. I need to get the people to like me rather than think about the long term. But what this debate is about is what is actually better for developing countries, right? And how that is protectionism is the path forward for long-termism within these very states. So the dependency on foreign resources, or rather the finished goods that you get, is why you don't export these resources. Number two, however, how do you actually have money on your side of the house, right? Because that's a question that they try to ask. First of all, key existing industries that already exist that you should capitalize on. That looks like at the point in time, Pakistan and India got their freedom from Britain, or particularly maybe Pakistan because we're in economic ruin, because we did not have protectionism like India. You had things like the textile industry, which was something that was the best textile industry in terms of the world. What happened, however, was that you started relying on brands that existed outside of your country. You neglected your own textile industry and your indigenous population and indigenous economy, and that is why that key existing industry, at the point in time that you let MNCs come into your country and compete with these individuals, that key industry was completely crippled. Nobody actually wanted to buy products from these key existing industries, not because they were like just horribly bad, because of the fact that you literally cannot compete with an MNC because the resource asymmetry that they have, right? These are literally, they have already been developing for centuries, etc., within their own states like the United States of America, like China, etc. You don't have the capacity to compete with them. However, in the alternative, if you let the textile industry of Pakistan develop on its own, what would have happened is that there would have been economic circulation in terms of people buying the products, that being reinvested, and eventually you would have more quality. The reason why they cannot claim things like there wouldn't be any competition is because internal competition can still exist in terms of inter-company competition or even inter-industry competition within the very state that you're talking about. But also, the reason why you have money is also because if you have tariffs for like foreign goods, etc., you get increased governmental revenue from that, right? Like if you increase taxes, etc., or increase barriers of entry to MNCs, I think at that point in time, you are going to have more money as a government that increases capacity. But also, lastly, they characterize these people as like having no money at all. I think they're also like localized industrialists, right? This looks like sheikhs, etc., or Rajput families, or literally Murad Raso, etc., or different people who have lots of wealth, right? These are literally industrialists that do also exist within the local community. The reason why they were not able to develop the local economy, etc., or have internal development is because they had no market to capitalize on. We fundamentally create that vacuum. These industrialists, these entrepreneurs will eventually be able to get this capital in some way and eventually develop on their own. The reason why, even if on their side you get the capital eventually that you want to develop, you cannot develop anymore because competition draws you out, right? Because these companies had a first mover advantage that you let them exploit. The resource asymmetry, etc., right? How there's literally dumping of Chinese goods, etc., that exists, and that is something that you cannot compete with as a developing nation. This is literally crippling because you could have had alternatives, but you do not. Why is this? Why does it matter, particularly in a temporal sense? However, in terms of you enacting protectionism as soon as possible, that looks like a customization that happens to these countries, etc. How you create a culture of buying foreign products, etc. That's something that is not good. The challenge that they gave here, however, was that quality is going to go down for these people and standard of living. I think that the only people who want a global standard of living, according to the side opposition, might be like elitist kids who live within DHA. I don't think the average individual within Pakistan cares about buying Louis Vuitton. I think they would be fine with any shalwar kameez, kurta, etc., or any like shirt that they're going to wear, etc. Right? I don't think that that's something that's necessarily in need of people or the vast majority of people. The elitist bubble that they try to assert is not one that applies to most people in developing countries. But also, the brunt of tariffs is going to be applied to the elite class. Why? Because we told you the banning of the import of luxury goods, etc., is something that only affects the most wealthy within society. If you increase tariffs on that or imported goods, guess what happens? Your McDonald's might get more expensive, but guess who buys McDonald's? People who already are rich, people who already have money. Those people should contribute more to the economy if they have the money to spend, right? I think that's something that you can actually have as an act of redistribution for people. They say quality will go down. I already told you industries can exist. You have niche products, etc., that will be good. Local internal competition exists, etc. That's something that does not happen on their side because you can never compete. There is a crippling effect. But lastly, within this issue, we told you about how there's internal development in terms of the United States of America even being isolationist, etc. before this, right? But also my positive contribution in terms of the economy it will be integrated within this clash. That is to say that the politics that these MNCs play is very, very important in terms of them not being able to get benefit from NMCs. That looks like they have to meaningfully tax MNCs or pass policies that are going to harm these MNCs or control them at the point in time that they want to accrue benefits from them. Why will this not happen? Because of the fact that they get so entrenched within these economies, etc., because they are so powerful, because they literally incapacitate any other economic alternative, because they're like, you need to rely on our products. There's a dependency culture that was literally the reason why you had free market capitalism as a Western hegemonic ideology that you wanted to impose upon the world. You lied to them and said this is the only way for development. It was not. It was also not used by them themselves. So apparently that's very, very illogical that you would do that. But also what that does is, because these governments are extremely weak, because they inherit fractured structures in terms of politics, because they don't have a very, very strong economy, because they have infinite industries that need protection, these MNCs swoop in and then can infect governmental policy. They can have like less tax, etc. for MNCs. They can actively lobby the government, and that means that your autonomy as a people, as a state, is also harmed. They did not engage with our moral, however, about free market capitalism. The reason why this right matters is because you don't want to be dependent on the oppressor and continue to be oppressed. They did not rebut this, but we're going to bring it back further in third prop as well. So proud to propose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to invite the second opposition speaker to take the floor.
Hello, can I just get a minute? I need to quickly grab my charger.
Yes, Afra, go ahead.
I'm back.
Second opposition, are you ready?
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Notice how they're being very uncharitable with their examples, right? Their examples of MNCs or other companies coming in are just Louis Vuitton and like McDonald's. We think your entire industrial or textile industries also relies on these MNCs and these external companies that come in and make products that your entire market is based upon, right? But secondly, we think they're also making a huge contradiction when they're saying that we're taxing the rich on our side of the case, but at the same time, their problem on their flip side is to fix the essential industries that mainly affect the middle class people, right? On their side of the case, the main people that you affect, the middle class, by through these taxation policies, are what we'll be talking about in this debate. And we have two main issues today. First, see a principle on like colonization, and secondly, this practical on where these economies are better. But thirdly, also on globalization and like interdependence within economies, right? But firstly, then on the practical, we think that they run a very weird circular policy, right? Where their entire model is that this protectionist policy happens, but what we want is that we have protectionism, but then we also have globalization after that. That's the model that we're running. We think, firstly, that's just uncharitable to the motion, right? We think they're supposed to argue for protectionist policies as a whole, or just somewhat integrating protectionist policies for a long period of time, not just relying into all of their benefits on the fact that first you build up your economy and then you open up your economy. But secondly, we think the fact that their entire causation for this or their entire analysis is, hey, X thing happened and then Y thing happened after that, which is why it was caused by that thing, right? We don't necessarily see them giving any substantial reasons as to why global trade or the fact that these economies might have grown after protectionist policies were a reason for these things to happen, right? But we don't necessarily think that's true, right? We think, firstly, most of these economies grew after they opened up or shifted away from protectionism, right? We think protectionism harmed these economies, etc. We give you examples of how they promoted elite culture, insofar as all of these taxation policies or within these countries, etc., are giving subsidies only benefited the elite within these countries, etc. We feel like the fact that they had no competition or resources to sell these people, right? They keep on going on about resources, etc., etc. We think the fact that resources within these countries as well, when you, even if you're able to extract them yourselves, you have efficiency or use for them, simply due to the fact that firstly there's no buyers for those resources. All of those foreign investors that come into your country are no longer coming into your country simply because you've put so many embargoes and like tariffs and like limitations on trade that these people are no longer incentivized to invest within your country. But secondly, the market itself is bad simply because you don't have the resources to be able to extract these natural things present within your country in the first place, and there's no market, and these things end up having like bad or cheap quality overall. You just have an inefficient economy in your side of the case. But secondly, we've told you that these countries grew after they liberalized their economies, i.e. China was growing more in recent years after China started opening up its entire country to trade, right? China is one of the most like substantial trading like countries within the entire world, right? It's so interconnected, which is why its economy has grown in the past few years, because it's been able to trade within these countries, right? And they're like lying, right? China wasn't always protectionist. It always followed a like moderate policies of having some protectionist measures, but also following like free market, etc. economy. But secondly, on this example of India as well, we feel like the fact that India also liberalized their economy in 1990, insofar as they were able to develop their IT sector after that, simply because they got more investment and they had more foreign direct investment, which allowed them to substantiate their like place in the global market, etc. And also this weird example of Taiwan, it's always been an open market economy. It was never protectionist, right? But thirdly, we feel like even if these developing countries
like establish their economies as protectionist first, and then were able to grow. We feel like that was in a state where everyone was protectionist, i.e. the entire world was protectionist when these countries were also developing themselves or having protectionist policies, which is why when the entire world shifted to global free market trade, these countries were also able to make that shift smoothly and grow their economies. However, now in the status quo that we're arguing this debate in, where the entire world has become a global free market, we feel like it's then harder for these countries or these developing countries that are currently under the free market to then shift to protectionist policies. And even if they do shift to protectionist policies, they're going to be get left behind simply due to the fact that the entire global sphere has free market policies, and these developing countries then are left behind with their like free market system, etc. But on our side of the case, before that, but on MNCs, right? We told you MNCs give jobs to your local people, right? This is an undeniable fact. The fact that many local people get jobs from these MNCs, they get labor, etc. We don't necessarily see how like lobbying power is such a big of a deal, right? We think it's lobbying power is symmetric on both sides of the case, right? On our side of the case, you're going to have lobbying power for MNCs in our absolute worst case, maybe sure. But on your side of the case, you're going to have politicians who have lobbying power within the country when it's so closed off to each other. And in fact, on our case, we feel it's better because these both of these parties, MNCs and like your internal economy, etc., exist to hold each other accountable. Also, they're being like lying when they frame these MNCs as like very exploitative parties, right? Because these MNCs under international law can't exploit your government as much, right? But in our absolute worst case, we still think that the fact that these MNCs provide so much labor to these people, these MNCs provide good quality product and competition, which also pushes these local markets to develop, by the way. These local markets don't just cease to exist. These local markets are developed and they're pushed to have this competition, which is something that we've been running since first. They never engage with that. The fact that these MNCs are able to do that is much better than any like infringement on government sovereignty, right? We feel like our endpoint of catering to the people and catering to the middle class people is much more better on our side of the case. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
We're talking about multinational corporations. The only incentives these corporations have is making money and not letting anyone else have any capital within the economy. Why are they going to support you rather than critically?
Accountability. If their only incentive is making money, that means they have to also make products that cater to the people. If people are getting better products, cheaper products, we think that's a good thing because they're able to live a better quality life. But secondly, there are mechanisms of accountability that exist for these MNCs. They can't completely entirely exploit the people that exist within the thing. There's in fact, like in a global market that is internationalized, and you have relationships with other countries like the US, which hold MNCs, etc., accountable for exploitations like the South Africa sweatshop labor thing that happened. I don't remember exactly what it was called. But secondly, on our principal issue, right? They keep on talking about colonialism, but we don't understand there's a huge problem solution gap here, because the entire first speaker spends like 5 minutes of this argument talking about how colonialism is something, like we need to give back to or we need to get reparations for. But why does that mean you have to establish protectionist policies? Why does that mean you have to cut off your entire trade, etc., from the world, right? Why does that have to mean we also don't understand their model, right? Because they're saying, hey, we're establishing some like protectionist measures, but we're not exactly clear to what extent these protectionist measures exist, right? Does that also mean cutting off all political ties from these people, etc.? Does that also mean not taking funds, etc., from IMF, etc.? Then you need to sustain your country, right? We don't understand what their exact model is, and we don't understand how protectionism then solves this problem. If you're still interconnected with other countries in our which is like the only plausible solution, since you can't completely cut off all your political ties, then how are you achieving their principal endpoint of getting reparations for colonialism, etc., when you're still maintaining these ties with these people? But secondly, we don't need the shift and recognition has happened, right? These people have gone and shifted from these free market systems to these systems to be able to help these countries and maintain a balance between these countries. In fact, we feel like a free market system is less volatile to exploitation insofar as both these countries have some sort of leverage, insofar as they're interdependent on each other, i.e. a developed country is getting resources from your country and you're getting financial aid from that country as well. We think that in their side of the case, when you have these protectionist measures, there's just general global hostility is more as well, right? We gave you analysis on how after World War II, the recognition that this hostility between these countries existed because of the fact that they were so divided meant that these countries shift to a more globalized market, which is why they were able to alleviate any issues between them. But fourthly, we don't even in our absolute worst case, we don't care about some vague principle of benefiting reparation if you're still getting or benefiting people within your country right now. The government's primary duty is towards the people right now, insofar as we're getting them better quality products, cheaper products. We're allowing them to continue or have not fall into a trap or deficit, or their entire economy is breaking as a result of cutting off all of their important ties that they're so dependent on. We're very, very proud to oppose.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the third opposition speaker to take the floor.
Can I get 30 seconds?
Yes, sure. Guys, before you start, please mention your preferred method for PUIs. And please offer and take PUIs.
Okay. I'm ready. Yeah.
All right, whenever you're ready.
Yeah. Where's that?
Can you
Yes,
just wait 1 second, please?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Taiba, can you confirm if we have? Okay, ठीक है. I just noticed Abdurrahman was not connected. He's back.
Thank you very much. I just lost my connection. I was trying to get back.
ठीक है, no worries. We are good.
Okay. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, and 1. The reason why Tatas today can now, compete in the international stage with companies like Volkswagen or with companies like Audi is because they curtailed or they didn't open their economy for the first 50 years while we as Pakistan were too focused on getting dollars into our country. That is the exact reason why they can now stand on the international market with international competitors, etc. And look at them now. They're far ahead of us in like every aspect when it comes to economics, etc. A couple of strategic observations due to which they can never win this debate in any word. Firstly, there's a concession because they say the economic boom only came after liberalization. But the prerequisite to that liberalization was you developing your economies, was to you developing your industry, and it was to you revamping them structurally for them to then go on and compete in the international market. I am unsure as to what's true. That's a very big concession. But then this idea, they say that protectionist measures are going to exist forever. That's not true. That's literally against the concept of protectionist measure. Protection. You protect your economies against international markets so that they can compete with them. This is not something that's going to last for the entirety of humanity. Thirdly, I'm still unsure as to what the benefits of like free trade are, because this debate was not about, let's say, standard of living or foreign reserves being like increased. This debate was especially about free trade and how that's being better. I'll prove that to you why that's never going to happen in the very first place to begin with. Okay, then on to the first clash. That is the principal clash. We told you a couple of things. We told you as to how you have historically had the historical plundering in which countries like the Great Britain quite literally plundered you and looted you of your wealth. We talked to you about things like systemic incapacitation. We talked to you about things like Western imperialism, things like neocolonialism. We talked to you as to how this is the first instance this is the first time through which you're basically acting as self-defense, etc. The only response that I then get from on their side of the house is interdependence, etc. I think that's not true. Why is that so? Because you were eventually going to do it. So you would eventually have interdependence, etc. within these under countries in the form of like regional blocks or trade blocks, etc. Secondly, the simple fact that you have power asymmetry, etc. currently existing existing in the status quo as well. But then thirdly, interdependence panel, I am unsure as to, let's say, when you're a big like contributor within like the global economy, etc., why you are then likely to, let's say, not have peace, etc. That is not a direct rebuttal. But what do they then on a comparative tell you? The only thing that they talk about is like choice, etc. I'll integrate that into like my second idea, but the way up is pretty simple. We tell you that this is the first time through which you can, let's say, protect yourself against Western powers, against Western imperialism, versus on a comparative choice existing. I'll take that out in the second clash to begin with. What is the second clash then? The second clash is then on economics. What do we tell you? We tell you that you structurally, internally, like build up your economies in terms of production techniques, in terms of things like like improve like cost cutting techniques, etc. We secondly tell you as to how you cannot compete with the international market because of the problem, because of their like market shares, etc., or simply the fact that they're too powerful, or simply the fact that there's a asymmetry in terms of resource, etc. We then tell you about the exploitation of local resources. The potential for that is extremely high. You never do that because you're too reliant on other actors. And lastly, about this diversification of economy, as to how you should not put all of your eggs in one basket, etc. What do they then tell you on a comparative? Their first response is, well, guys, they're offering you, so why not take it? I have a couple of responses to this. Like the first response is pretty simple. Like here's the thing, right? Trade is only beneficial if redistribution ensures that the winners gains. For example, financial industry booming offsets the losers' pains. For example, the collapse of the automobile industry. This happens rarely because of four structural reasons, due to things like information failure, etc. But second, you have deadweight problems. For example, currently you can only provide marginal benefit because liberalization is done to such an extent that the probability of like further liberalization is just marginal benefit. Then, for example, price reduction, etc. You can never like liberalize and then expect to have the same sort of benefits, etc. Thirdly, because of political problems and thirdly, because of things like political problems and temporal problems, for example, workers now do not have their veto powers, etc., or simply the fact that you have political instability within that country. But then fourthly, free trade rarely happens in the current status quo. Why is that so? Because you have things like the US-China trade war, you have things like the Russia-Ukraine war, you have the Gaza-Israel Palestine blockade, you have actively have blocks, etc., being made. I'm unsure as to which like free trade they're then like talking even about in the very first place. But then the first argument, then standard of living, MNCs, local procedures, they say, you allocate resources towards local markets, etc. We think that markets today in the current status quo are extremely imperfect. The reason for that is that simply the fact that you have excess demand in a lot of instances, and you simply not have enough, let's say, supply to meet that in the very first place. But this then talk to you about choice and quality. The first thing is that those MNCs, when they come in, they only target the higher like elitist products. This is like, for example, high value products that they're then going to take her. But then secondly, the exclusive harm then on their side of the house is of dumping, because these multinational corporations like produce at like lower cost at mass levels. They can then dump these products within your industries, due to which your local competitors or your local producers never even get a chance to compete with them in the very first place. So this means that you're actively stifling, or you're actively like reducing the probability of like these local economies even existing, because then the competitors can simply offer the same product at a much like cheaper price. But then their last idea within this argument about how this hurts employment, etc., and you have a surplus of labor. No, on your side of the house, surplus of labor would still exist, because on your side of the house, the Chinese person who is then going to, let's say, come and build a dam in, I don't know, the north of Pakistan, or he's then going to come and work for CBank. On our side of the house, the state has an incentive to invest in, let's say, education, etc., or skilled labors, to actively, let's say, reduce the amount of capital flight, or let's say capital flight that then happens within your country in the very first place to begin with. But then secondly, they say you have things like foreign reserves, etc. Your loans are, you're not going to get loans, etc. Firstly, like all of this, they first need to prove to me as to why like further liberalization is even necessary. But secondly, you're still going to trade with other countries, because you recognize, because you simply cannot remove all trade. There is some trade that's still being done, because you recognize that you simply can't produce all things. So this means that the probability of, let's say, your foreign reserves being shut down is then very less likely. But then secondly, they say you're going to give high subsidies, due to which you're not going to get loans. I think loans, like international institutions, only give you loans because they recognize that, because they need this guarantee that you'll give them loans back. Insofar as you're giving indicators like providing subsidies to your local investors, etc., they'll get this confidence that you'll then invest and provide them with this. So I'm unsure as to why loans would then not exist then on our side of the house. But then lastly, this idea about short-termistic and long-termistic factors. We tell you that in the current status quo, people are suffering. They're not alleviating any problems in the current status quo. People in Pakistan, for example, die of, I don't know, stampedes due to food, etc. The current situation is extremely bad. But we tell you, 20 or 30 years down the line, the probability of you not having the same conditions is extremely high, and we've given you successful ideas for that. But then lastly, Sultan's whole idea about how you can have things like tax and lobbying, etc., and that's why these multinational corporates are simply tackle the elitist market. They simply not have an incentive to, let's say, focus on the local market. The simple fact that they have so much power is extremely bad. The simple idea that government spending is then going to be less likely on their side of the house. So the probability of welfare, etc., the probability of subsidies, etc., you actively reinvesting in the economy is like greatly reduced then on their side of the house. They are not improving the condition of the average individual because of things like austerity, because of things like dumping, etc., because of things like price mechanisms. At the end of this debate, they're not their main stakeholders was the person who is currently living in the world. They're not benefiting him at any point for all given reasons.
I thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I would now like to invite the opposition reply speaker to take the floor. Sorry,
So am I audible?
I forgot that the opposition here. Go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yep.
I'll be taking my POIs in the chat, not verbally. Okay. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. It's very funny that, first proposition comes up and talks about all this West imperialism, neo-colonialism, and all that. And then Ahmed Sultan literally drops all of that. And then the third probably starts off their speech with this kind of moral argument, right? So let me just get that out of the way and tell you why we win, even though Hiba already elaborated on that, right? Firstly, let me just understand, if they have such a problem with the West imperialism and them neo-colonializing you, understand now the West is literally offering you this way out it's literally establishing their MNCs into you, allowing that kind of free trade, allowing your currency to stable. So literally just take that help if you have a problem with this westernization, right? But secondly, if their moral is so important, understand why are they then shifting to globalization 50 years after? Like 50 years later, just forget about your morals. Their moral argument literally does not stand, right? But then on their third proposition literally said in their debate, what, this debate is not about standard of living, but this debate is about the free trade. We at Freedom Opposition tell you that as long as, whether it's through short-term mechanisms, whether it's through long-term mechanism, as long as we help the people right now living in these developing countries and we improve their quality of life, then we simply just take this debate, right? On a comparative, we need to prove to you that globalization, even if globalization in our best case and our worst case is good for these developing countries, and we'll tell you how the examples also don't stand, which is literally just substitute for analysis, right? Moving on to the first issue about this debate about this quality of life, right? Over here, understand that in countries like India, Germany, etc., protectionism literally fails. Why do these protectionism fail? Because understand how wealth is literally concentrated within the elites, right? All the wealthy people own these. Who do you think owns all these mines in Bengal and Assam? All these wealthy people, and they do not let extraction of these resources because they like the fact that their wealth is concentrated within them, right? There's a lot of wealth disparity, which is why the protectionism failed, because your local industries or local government can actively go on and extract these resources, right? Secondly, we told you how there's absolutely no competition within these local industries and why competition in the national industries is better off. I'll prove when I move on, right? But then understand, Taiwan was always an open economy, right? Germany opened up their economy by establishing these, using this wealth from the West, right? Germany and India also opened up these economies, and that is why Tata right now is suddenly so huge, and Tata right now is able to compete with other, and why India has their own sustainable economy, right? But moving on to this issue, they're like, understand, when you impose this protectionism, that means taxes increase, right, on these imports. When these taxes increase, that means these prices also increase, right? When prices increase, that means your local people cannot actively buy these essential goods. Your local people can't buy food, etc., right? Feel like you're harming these local people and also stopping them, especially in developing countries. And after the entire pandemic, with the entire global economic recession, developing countries are facing extreme economic harms with inflation, right? Over there, then you actively de-incentivize them and actually stop them from buying these countries, right? Over here, then there's also contradiction with this idea of taxes, right? Because they say, wait, you know what? Taxes will only be employed on things like Louis Vuitton and McDonald's, and because you know what, that is the only part of country which operates on foreign development, etc. But then they're like, wait, your entire textile industry did not develop because your essential industries were also dependent on foreign, right? If we prove to you, understand that according to their characterization, your local industry is developed on dependent on these foreign imports, right? So when you increase the taxes on these foreign imports, you also increase the taxes on these essential goods, which is why you actively de-incentivize, right? But secondly, on the upper class literally does not pay taxes. There is an entire problem of developing countries that the tax distribution idea is not, there's no tax distribution within countries like Pakistan that say that wealthy people, like majority of the people sitting here right now in this debate room, I'm sure may not pay taxes, or parents may not pay taxes because there's no essential tax system, right? So I don't understand how this tax actively falls into your case, right? But moving on within this issue, this idea about competition, right? Over here, I'll prove to you why this international competition is better than local competition. Understand, international competition means that their products are very diverse, then their products are also spread out in a lot globally in a lot of countries, right? These MNCs, these countries like MNCs like McDonald's, Louis Vuitton, all these shoe places or whatever, that means they have a lot of high quality products, right? When your local companies have this incentive to compete against high quality products, then they automatically have an incentive to also produce high quality products, right? When local companies are competing with each other, that means the quality production is on a comparative very low, right? Which is why the quality of products that you give to your generation, that means that is also decreased, right? Which is why I feel this international competition is very interesting, right? But then secondly, the idea about how the textile industry didn't develop because you didn't open up. Understand, the reason why most industries and stuff don't develop in countries like Pakistan is because there's a lot of political instabilities. I think there are a lot of family feuds that exist. That means wealth is constantly within the families, and they over here, this also links to the idea about how wealth is literally distributed unequally, right? The problem isn't that they didn't open up, the problem is the way that these industries and the way the countries operate economically is the entire product, right? But then understand how in competition right now you have like these foreign products, right? In competition, countries like Pakistan also produce then these foreign products. Like for instance, in competition to Kellogg's cereal, there's a lot of Fauji cereal, right? In competition to, let's say, just some kind of Louis Vuitton, there are also a lot of local shoe shops that is
I think they've gotten disconnected, so I'll just pause the timer.
possible.
Can someone drop them a message?
Okay, hello, we're sorry, we're disconnected.
That's perfectly fine. I paused the timer as well. The last thing I heard was
Okay,
that in competition to Louis Vuitton, there can be some other local shoes
yeah.
thing.
Okay, so the time is 5.
She's
दोबारा
still stuck for me, वैसे.
फिर से stuck हो गए. अब ठीक है.
Okay, is it fine now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so time is 5:30. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. When then this idea about MNCs, right? We feel like they're literally coming up to you and lying to you that when you know what MNCs come in, they bring their skilled labor, right? That is not true, because when you see MNCs like these working in these countries, example McDonald's, KFC, what you see on the drive-throughs, what you see is this local staff, right? You see Pakistani people or these Pakistani riders actively having a labor in these MNCs, right? We feel like there's a lot of labor supply gap, right? Something that we also talked about, not engaged with. The fact that there's a lot of labor in these developing countries, but there are not enough industries to compete with, and we feel like
Shahan was disconnected. But it was only for a few seconds. It's fine. You can resume.
okay. So okay, let me just. Okay, yeah. We feel like even if we take them there at their best case, that you know what, these industries will certainly develop, why can't they compete with MNCs? Because as long as you have like 100 McDonald's or 100 branches of KFC throughout Pakistan, local industries can never compete to that, because MNCs are also spread throughout globally, right? That means the amount of jobs and the quality of jobs that they provide is amazing, right? Over here, we also build this comparative of long-term versus short-term, right? Understand over here, their second prop is all about, you want it's okay to take that kind of short-term dip, right? Understand why that's not possible. That's yeah, मैं disconnect हो रही हूँ.
I can hear you, Vise.
I can. The time is stopped for me. Your timer isn't stopped. एक काम करो, अपना camera बंद कर दो, so that I'll try to turn off my camera.
We can hear you, Vise.
Okay, yeah, your screens were stuck, so timers बहुत वो हो रहे थे. I'm so sorry for the disruptions.
It's fine. It's at 6:35.
Okay. So the comparative between long-term and short-term goes like this, right? Because understand, these developed countries cannot afford that kind of dip that comes with short-term, right? Because people right now literally do not have food on their tables, or these people right now cannot afford any essential goods. They're already completely stretched thin with their economies, right? Over their propositions that, hey, let's take a short-term dip, let's mess with these people more, and then in 20 years or 50 years, when they might not even be alive, then your country will benefit, right? Over there, we feel that the government then owes a moral responsibility to the people that are living right now, instead of the people that will come 50 years later. Right? But secondly, also how Pakistan literally had that kind of protectionism system when they for a few months removed subsidies, right? Understand that literally failed for people, that literally failed for Pakistan, because that is when your economy literally started to crash, right? But then understand how this entire comparative of globalization will come after, right? Over here, we've told you to build your industries, you need some kind of capital, right? For these developing countries, you need to rely on something, right? Why then reliance on these MNCs is better than these institutions like IMF, right? Because understand, these MNCs, you don't have to pay back any sort of debt to them, right? So as long as you're getting capital for them, you can invest that capital into building that kind of industry instead of taking loans from IMF, etc., where you have to pay back them that debt, right? Which is why you feel globalization after is not the process. You have to use that globalization money to build that, right? But understand how literally they came to a characterization and agreed that globalization is a very good process for countries because of their entire idea about dependency, right? The entire global world is dependent, right? But on a secondary level, understand, when you globalize after, your economy is not exposed to those kind of international competition. That is to say that if ever there's some kind of dip in free trade, etc., that means your economy takes a lot of dip rather than consistently being on that kind of globalization, consistently keeping up with that globalization, right? We proved to you that why this globalization is important for your economies to build up. Feel like team opposition rate takes this debate.
Thank you for that fine speech. I would now like to call upon the opposition reply speaker to take the floor.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. It's very funny how they try and like use the status quo against us, because the reason Pakistan is in the situation or economic crisis it is in today is because it started implementing protectionist policies in the last decade or so, i.e., implementing subsidies that then had to be taken off simply due to the fact that it relied on IMF loans, etc., which they never refuted, by the way, the fact that these countries still will take funds from international monetary funds, etc., and other things like that. And the fact that Pakistan had like banned imports, etc., that made it in its situation that it is in today, right? But notice what's more logical for you to understand. Firstly, a country or like an industry developing in like a complete isolation and absentia, where it has no like competition at all, where all of its products have to be sold on high prices simply due to the fact that it doesn't have competition, where it just doesn't have any person or like industry to look up to or like to compete with, right? Rather than an industry that has multiple industries alongside it that it's actively competing with, going against with, constantly on a rush rising like race to make better products to appeal to the people more, right? We feel like that's just much more logically, intuitively viable, right? That these countries will firstly just make better products when they have competition within their countries, but also will sell these on much lower prices that appeal to the people simply due to the fact that there's competition to make things more affordable. But like a few like strategic observations, I hate to use that word, about their case, right? Firstly, they dropped their entire moral argument at second. They didn't bring it back. They didn't develop on it at all. They had no mechanization for any of their case at first prop, by the way. But also they lie a lot. They give examples of how people like tax the rich. That's not true. The taxes aren't taken to the rich. The most vulnerable actor in this debate is the middle class, who these taxes and tariffs etc. are taken from. But notice how they make a very circular argument, like their entire practical argument, when they concede to our endpoint that you can only access the benefit of protection.
फिर से आवाज बंद हो गई है. I've paused the timer. Let's wait for them.
In the first place, having MNCs within your country.
Guys, you got disconnected for a bit. I paused the timer. Kuch bolo, so I can see if we can hear you now.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. You were actually talking about protectionism. I don't know what protectionism.
Okay.
The last word you said was protectionism. I paused it at 152.
Okay. Secondly, why the harms of protectionism outweigh any like prerequisite development that you can have through it. But thirdly, why you just generally are able to build your better global economy through industrialization within your globalized market in the first place. But fourthly, why the fallout of having the shift is so bad that you can't afford it within the capacity or the specific context of these developing countries in the current status quo, where most of the other like developed countries in the world are running on a free market system. I.e., having these MNCs within your country for such a long time who are so heavily entrenched in you, when you suddenly block them out or like take them out of your country, you're gonna have such a bad fallout simply due to the fact that you were dependent and reliant on these MNCs in the first place, right? But we told you multiple things, right? We told you that the most primarily affected vulnerable actor in this debate is the middle class, and we wanted to cater to them, right? We wanted to cater to them by giving them much better and like cheaper products in general, that we get better on our side through this competition, through this foreign direct investment. They never engage with BIA's analysis on how we give them people economic benefits through a free market system, right? But secondly, we told you that having a lack of competition in their world is just much worse, because you get these high price products, etc. But we told you that insofar as these people within these countries don't have the capacity to develop on their own, we don't see how they'll then have the capacity to compete on an international level, i.e., when your countries or industries within your country are trying to develop somewhat without having direct competition from external factors. Once they shift to this globalized economy, or once they shift to this free market system, they're not going to have the capacity to compete then either, simply due to the fact that they were isolated in the first place and their industries developed in absentia to these global industries who are dominating the global market right now. Why do we win this debate? We win this debate because we've told you, firstly, why their system or their model was essentially like logically flawed, right? Because all of their entire case relied on our endpoint of having a globalized free market to access their benefits in the first place. We also told you why all the harms of protectionism are so much worse for these developing countries, insofar as they can't afford to make the shift then, and also insofar as these protectionist policies just generally harm the common man on their side of the world, the common man who's already suffering right now and can't afford to suffer more, or afford this dip that their entire case is premised on, this entire like dip, or the fact that these developing countries can afford this loss to then pick themselves back up. That's simply not true. We win this debate.
Thank you for that fine speech. I'd now like to call upon the proposition reply speaker to take the floor.
Can I just get 30 seconds?
Yes, that's fine.
All right. Am I audible?
Yes, you're perfectly audible.
All right. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If this debate was about whether protectionism is generally a good or bad policy, maybe opposition's arguments would apply. But this debate is exclusively about countries that are developing right now. These are developing countries. So they're talking about, oh, China should not be protectionist, Taiwan should not be protectionist, South Korea should not be protectionist. They already did this policy. They were already protectionist in the past. And now that they have actually developed as a country, now that they are part of the global north, etc., now they are actually moving away from protectionism and moving towards globalization. However, if you enter globalization as a country that is still developing, that is not yet developed, that is where all of their harms apply, etc. That is what this debate was about at the end of the day. Countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, Argentina, etc., these countries that need to right now have protectionist policies. But let's talk about China and India. They said liberalization gave them benefits, but this happened after the fact. They literally had years and decades of capacity building, etc. And I think this is actually concessionary at that point in time, that India and China are extremely
Guys, अब आप disconnect हो गए हैं. I can't hear you.
They can't hear us.
Now I can hear you.
Okay. What is the last thing you heard?
China and India.
Okay. Okay. Can I get like 10 extra
Sure,
seconds or
sure.
something?
Yes, that's
All
fine.
right. Claim benefits like, oh, Taiwanese semiconductors are really, really important. Those are industries specifically that had protectionist policies. And then at the point in time, like South Korea's automobile industry, they developed. That's when you started trading, being able to trade value-added goods to the world. Otherwise, if you don't have protectionism, you have to trade things like raw resources, etc. You literally have all of this wealth, etc., all this natural resource sucked out of your country, and that is something that is bad for you, right? That's not something that most countries, etc., in the developing world can claim. That's something that is an example that empirically cannot apply within this debate. They talked about things like labor, etc. Labor is usually imported. You're literally talking about Chinese workers who steal your jobs, etc., right? They want skilled labor for this. You currently do not have skilled labor because you don't actually have protectionism, etc. We think that kind of labor is something that actually steals jobs from local individuals because MNCs prefer these individuals or they import their labor within these countries. But also, they said globalization is good because of trade, etc. We already told you what was probably going to happen in terms of like good foreign reserves is not that you will get good foreign reserves, but you're going to go into a trade deficit because of the fact that the only thing you're exporting is something low in value and importing lots of things that are extremely expensive. Contexts like the US-China trade war, Russia-Ukraine conflict, etc., mean this is something that cannot apply right now, and trade is not as perfect as they claim it to be. But also, even if we have this as a contemporary policy, right, even in countries right now, we don't understand why further liberalization is going to have any benefits, right? This is going to lead to marginal benefits because of the fact that you've already reduced tariffs to a certain degree that is way, way too much. This looks like deadweight problems, etc., and political issues in terms of tax catch problems within Pakistan. Pakistan has a horrible tax catch for MNCs. This is literally the status of most developing countries. We think that you're not going to benefit from these countries at that point in time, right? But also, we think that tariffs and added taxation you can do right now as a protectionist member to get more revenue, etc., from these MNCs, which is going to benefit you, right? But then let's talk about the things that they concede, because I think that the only thing that they substantiate within this debate was capacity, right? They literally concede this when they make an entire argument about wealth concentration in developing countries, right? If they're talking about wealth inequality as their problem, capitalism is probably the mother of all wealth inequality. I'm not sure why these MNCs are going to ensure that, right? I think local incentives or empowering governments rather than having MNC lobbies dictate economic policy which favors them is something that's going to be good. But they said these MNCs offer you a way out. I think that's categorically untrue. MNCs are not as altruistic. They're pernicious actors, etc. They only give one assertion that international law exists. But the time when you took the recorded case to the TCC, Pakistan got screwed over because again, Bretton Woods institutions, the context that we actually gave you since first, how there is hegemony, etc., of the West. But also, their only stakeholder was the poor individual and their standard of living. I'm pretty sure a lower class individual is going to have naan chane instead of, I don't know, McDonald's, etc. They're probably going to go to a darzi rather than buy from an MNC, stuff like that, or buy from an international brand and I don't know, engineers or something like that. But also, they said that resources, etc., exist. We think that if capacity exists, you have to be able to tax these people because government spending can increase and therefore welfare can increase at that point. But they said that taxes, etc., cannot be taken from the elite. If elite people exist, you make them pay the extra tariffs. Elitist people are usually the people that buy the products from the MNCs. We build up the economy slowly.
All right. Thank you for that fine speech. It's 4:15 anyway, so we will just end the debate here. Thank you both teams for a very engaging debate. You can leave the room and go to the main hall because the decision is going to be announced there. Thank you and good luck.